Do a review of Lekutei Sichas in chelek Tes Zayin, volume 16. We'll do the second sicha of the parsha of Tetzaveh. The Rebbe is going to explain in this sicha what turns out to be a machloikos between the Ramban and Rashi, what the Me'il, the bottom of the Me'il, the pasuk says there was rimoinei tcheles. There were pomegranates shaped, made out of this wool of the tcheles, this purple of this blue wool, the sky blue wool, and they were shaped like pomegranates. But according to the Ramban argues that they should have been, according to Rashi, in Rashi's interpretation, they should have been apples. The Rebbe takes these two ideas of apples and pomegranates and explains that the Yidden are compared to both, and the level of apple represents a higher milag advantage of Yidden. The pomegranates express, as the pasuk says, "Kepela charimen rakosech," which talks Poishi Yisrael Malay Mitzvahs Kerimen, talks about the lower level of Yisrael, and it associates with the fact that the Kohen Gadol had to have these bottom on his the Me'il. When he needed to enter into the Beis Hamikdash, he needed to carry, according to Rashi, these pomegranates, these Yidden who are on the bottom, on the fringe, always bring them along with him when as he goes into the oil moed, he goes into the kodesh, he brings along the Kohen Gadol, all the Yidden, even the fringe, even the Rimonim. According to the Ramban, who looks at Yidden in a more pnimistic way, he talks about it should have been, if that was the case, in Tapuchim, unless it had a practical means, as we will see in the explanation of the sicha. And the Rebbe goes out at the end and says that there is actually an advantage also in the avodah of the noise that is made when you go in. The Rebbe discusses the whole idea, not to make noise, yet to make noise. Brings in the Baal Shem Tov when Hasidim used to make various different kinds of external emotions when they were davening and doing mitzvahs, and they were criticized. The Baal Shem Tov said that when a person is drowning, he is doing all kinds of motions in order to save himself. There's a lot of different ideas. But first, Rebbe starts off by just trying to figure out what the Ramban questions Rashi. So let's look in the inside. Aleph. So first we're going to discuss what was the purpose of the Rimoinei Tcheles. It says that they were hollow, and Rashi learns that even though they were hollow, so they were made like a pomegranate, that was the shape, but inside of the pomegranate it was hollow. If one reads the verse, one can mistaken think that they put a bell, a pomain, inside the pomegranate. But Rashi says, no. The bells were in between the pomegranates. So they were bells, and the bells were not inside of the pomegranate. So let's look inside. This is the way Rashi explains. Aleph. Benegeya the Me'il, as far as it relates to the Me'il, Zog der Posik. The pasuk states, "V'asiso al shulav rimoinei tcheles goimer." On the bottom of the me'il, of the coat of the Kohen Gadol me'il, you will make on the bottom pomegranates made out of tcheles, and that should be al shulav on the bottom of the me'il, soviv, all around. Upamoine zohov, and you have golden bells that make noise, Besoicham soviv, within them, all around. So one would think that it means that the Rimonim, they were hollow and they had the bells in them. But Rashi explains, no, there were Rimonim, and the bells were, Besoicha means in between each of these Rimonim, there were bells. Is Rashi Mefarish? So Rashi explains, As Choj, the Rimonim Zainin given Agulim Vachalulim, although these pomegranates, these tchelis pomegranates, shaped pomegranates, were circular and they were hollow, so therefore a bell would be very, very fitting to be put into that hollow area. Is over the pshat from pamenezov betoicham. But what is, Rashi says, the meaning when it says pamenezov betoicham? Nit as the pamoinim hamzach gefunden in chol does not mean that these bells were inside the hollow of the rimonim, from the rimonim. Nor beinehem, they were in between. So there was a rimoin on both sides. The pamin was besoicham, meaning in between the two rimonim, not inside of the rimonim. Nor beinehem sover, in between them sover. Bein shnei rimonim pamin echad, between two pomegranates, those tchelis pomegranates, it was one bell, that was connected, was pasted and hanging on the bottom of the me'il, of the coat of the Kohen Gadol. The Rambam has issue. The Rambam disagrees. The Ramban disagrees with Rashi. He says that these pamoinim were actually inside of the bells, he says. The Ramban says that the pamoinim were actually inside of the hollow of the rimonim. So, because the Ramban asks in Rashi, frag the Ramban, loit Rashi's pshat, the way Rashi learns that the pamoinim were in between the two rimonim, was the pamoinim kumtois. It turns out as loy hoyu harimoinim mishamshim klum. So the rimonim, these pomegranates, they hadn't served for anything. What did they do? Because they didn't house the bells. The bells were on the side. If their purpose was only for beauty, he says, Loma hoyu asuyim kirimoinim chalulim. So why does he make him like these hollow pomegranates? Yasim kimin tapuchi zohov. Let him make him like golden apples. So all of a sudden, the Ramban seems to say, why does he make them open when they don't need to be closed? They could be closed because you're not putting anything in the rimonim, according to Rashi. The rimonim are on the side. But the Ramban doesn't just say, let him make him closed. He says, Yasim kimin tapuchi zov. You should make it like golden apples instead of golden. What difference does it make? So, answer the Ram, the Mizrahi answers, Lo yodaiti lomo bocher hatapuchim yosem min harimonim. So why does the Ramban ask if we're making it pomegranate, if it's making it lenoi, why don't we make it frek the Ramban on Rashi? Why don't we make it apples? So what's the difference between apples or pomegranates? That the Ram says, why is the Ramban asking on Rashi? They should be apples, so they made it in the shape of pomegranate, the shape of apples. So the Mefarshim explained that the Ramban's question is not whether merely apples or pomegranates, the shape of these Mishula Me'il, that they were pomegranates versus apples. But the real question of the Ramban is, why are they chalulim? First, First, explain as the kasha from Ramban that what's the Ramban's problem is when he gave them prat from chalulim. He's not asking make it apples versus the pomegranate, but his question is, why make it hollow? Bald as the pamoinim seinen mit gehangen in hollow von the rimoinim, since the pamoinim were not hanging in the hollow of these pomegranate. So why would the pomegranate make chalulim? So the issue is not the pomegranates or apples, but the issue is not the shape. Why are they chalum? That's the Ramban's question, as the Mefarshim say. But the Rebbe says you still see the Ramban brings down. He doesn't just say why does it made hollow. He says befedish apple. As bleibt aber nicht move on, but we still don't understand. Was der Rambam's kashi is nor wegen dem Prat von Chalulim. If the Rambam's question is only about why was it hollow, why does he even have to mention unis noch meshane? And he changes at stot rimonim. He uses tapuchim, apples. Yasim kibit tapuchizo. The Ramban should have just said, he should make them chalulim, the rimonim. Why change the shape of what they were? The Rebbe is trying to bring out that the Rambam's argument is v'pnim sinyonim, as the Rebbe will explain. The Rambam's argument is that there should be tapuchim. Rashi, Pshuto Shel Mikra, needs to be rimonim, pomegranate, as the Rebbe will explain later on. But first, the Rebbe in Ois Beis tries, maybe we can connect that the reason why tapuchim, because tapuchim are already found as a beautifying in the tziyur, in the shape of the menorah. We have this kaptorim. Rashi said they were tapuchim. So maybe the Ramban is asking if it should be lenoi, should be done tapuchim, not pomegranates. But the Rebbe is going to want to ask, okay, so why is the Ramban say that it should be tapuchim, and why does Rashi hold it should be pomegranates, as the Rebbe will explain? Base. We can explain this. When gefindt as in the menorah seinen given lenoi, we find that in the menorah, that what beautified the menorah was givim, that these cups, they have kaftoidim, that has these buttons, uprochim, and knobs, kaftoidim knobs, uprochim is flowers. And the kaftoidim, these knobs, these seinen given kimin tapuchim, as she says, they were like apples. And since that these pomegranates that were hanging on the bottom of the me'il, they were used, according to Rashi, only as noi, because according to the Ramban, they used them, they put the bells in them. But according to Rashi, they were just annoyed. The bells weren't even going there. They should not be in the image of pomegranate nor kibin tapuchim. They should be like apples, but they from the menorah should be similar to the beauty, which when we talk about a fruit of the menorah was an apple. There should be an apple here too. Why make a pomegranate? Okay, so that would be an argument from the Ramban against Rashi. As Blaito benit verstandi, still don't understand it. Aleph. Das Gufa davon mabir, mit was ist neu verbunden davke mit tapuchim. So why is neu specifically connected with apples? I'm saying it should be apples because we find the apples on the menorah. Why should it be connected with that? And basically, that's Rashi. What is Rashi? Was is their tam? What's the reason? Was by me'il and given the rimoinim lenoi. I was there. There was the pomegranates were the beauty, and by the menorah tapuchim over there was tapuchim. So basically, we need to understand what is this rimonim, what is this tapuchim, why according to Rashi the rimonim were used for the me'il, the tapuchim were used for the menorah. The Rebbe is going to explain. This has to do with the rimonim b'chalal, the idea that they were in the bottom, and the noise that they make, and what the Kohen Gadol's what the intention was. The Kohen Gadol brings them in with him, as the Rebbe will explain. In Oish Gimel, the Rebbe explains what's the purpose of these bells on the bottom of the me'il, and he brings down from the Ramban that he says before you enter, you have to sort of introduce yourself. You come into the Kodesh. The bells are like sort of an agent saying, "Oh, here I come." And on Yom Kippur, because they Yidden are on such a high level, they don't need an agent. They can go right in. That's why there were no bells over there. But the Rebbe says the bells themselves it's not just a preparation to come in. There has to be some meaning in the Avodah itself with the bells, what they mean. And the Rebbe is going to explain that the bells make noise that represents when a person is still far away. In order to get close, there's noise there. Let's go inside. Gimel. Wegen dem Zweck von die Pamoine HaMe'il. What is the purpose of these bells of the Me'il? Zog der Pasuk. The Pasuk says, "V'nishma koile b'vayel HaKodesh," so that the voice, and the voice here is translate not for the Kohen. The Rebbe brings down the orders. Koiloi means the voice of the bells that on the Me'il. B'vayel HaKodesh, when it comes in. Unef Azoifel is those given the Geya in the Avodah from Kohen Gadol. This is so important that the voice of the Kohen Gadol should be heard when he comes into the Kodesh, that without it, it would be as durch dem benishma koiloi, he'll be protected. Without it, v'lo shouldn't die. Which means if he doesn't have those bells, then he goes into the Kodesh, he would die. From no, we know yes. You say you don't die if you have the bells, but if you don't have the bells, you die. So that means it's such an important part that you have to have those bells, otherwise he dies. So darf man verstehen. You have to understand this. Why is the sound that the bells make, the bells of the ringing of these bells are so important when you come to they must take place when you come to the Kodesh. The Kodesh Adarabah. One can think maybe the contrary. Loi berash Hashem. Hashem, as the Pasuk says, is not with big noise. When he heard the Navi going by, he said, Loi berash, this is not, because it's not the noise. But when Kim Bekol Momadaka, as the Pasuk says over there, only within the Melachim Aleph, that is the Kwel Momadaka. That's a simon of the Shekhinah, and the presence of the Shekhinah coming to the Beis HaMikdash. So there has to be a Kwel Momadaka. Then we see the Kohen Gadol itself. As a Knisa Lifnai Lifnim, when he has to go inside, not just to the Kodesh, to the Oyel Moed, when he has to go inside to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, B'Yom Kippurim, is given Dafke on the Big Dizov. That was without the golden garments. He had only Big Dilovan. So it was without the Me'il and the sound of the bells. There was no bells over there. So why do we need the bells? So the Ramban is Masbir. The Ramban explains as one who suddenly just comes into the room of the king is liable for death. And what is the sound of the bells? Is as this is sort of like asking permission to enter and to do the service. Why the Kohen Gadol, when he went to the Kodesh Kedoshim, did not need that? And those was their Kohen Gadol. The reason why the Kohen Gadol does not require taking permission and wearing those me'il, as we said before, when on Yom Kippur, when he goes into Kodesh Kedoshim, by Marangin, when he went into the inside of the inside, going in all the way to the Kodesh Kedoshim. But this logic of the Ramban, it would seem, well, sicha is gefordert, for sure, it's a foratory. If you need to announce that you're coming into the Kodesh, for sure, if you're going into Kodesh HaKadoshim, you need to certainly announce it, but yet we don't do it. And what's the reason? Is there tam? Hashem on Yom Kippur points out the advantage of the Yidden. The pasuk does not require an agent to go ahead and announce their announce their coming. They don't need to come on to these bells, lashmiya koil, to make the sound. Like a person is sending an agent to tell him that he's coming. You don't need to do that on Yom Kippur. Okay, so that explains why we need these bells. But it only says this seems to be not part of the avodah of the me'il that we service. It's just something to notify. The Rebbe says we used to find an avodah in the bells itself. In the sounds, in the noise that they make themselves. Like them, pirush kumtois. According to this interpretation, it turns out as their vinishma koilef in the pamonim, this that the sound was heard from the bells is nitke chelik from the avodah. That's not part of the service. It's norbelois ahagdoma v'achona to the avodah. It is only an introduction and a preparation for the service. But the Rebbe says it should have something more with avodah. Bald ober as yeder prat. Since every detail b'shayches to the avodah from Kohen Gadol, as it connects to the service of the Kohen Gadol, is betachlis hadiyuk, is the ultimate accurate. It is specifically for sure when with azavos is verbund mit einish misa, such a detail which is tied to the punishment of death. If he doesn't have those bells, canal as mentioned earlier, und die pamonim mashmiya kol given and they made the sounds, these bells made the ringing sounds even at the time of the service itself. It's not like just when they entered to say that they're coming, but they made noise later on. Is mistaber as v'nishma koiloi, that the v'nishma koiloi logical is an inyan versus negeya raveda gufa, something which is part of the service itself. So now the Rebbe explains Dalet that you have to bring the Kohen Gadol when he comes into the Kodesh, he's bringing in everybody. When a person is far about Tshuva and comes closer to Hashem, he goes with extra force, with thus making noise. The Kohen Gadol brings them all in. Let's look inside. Dalet. Einer von the Biurim in them, one of the explanations of this. The Kohen Gadol getan sein Aveda als Shlich von Klal Yisrael. The Kohen Gadol did his service as an agent of the Jewish community in general. Und das meint b'meila, and this means therefore, as bivoyei in sein Reingehen ala Kodesh, when he entered into the holy, nimmt mit sich herein dem ganzen Klal Yisrael la Kodesh, he takes along with him the entire Jewish community into the Kodesh. He goes into the Kodesh, brings along all the Yid. As is verstandig und erklärt bekamen mekomis barucha. It is understood, and it's also explained in many places at length, as the avodah from Baal Tshuva, the service of the return people are doing tshuva, is mitzad harichuk, which comes because they were far away. Antläuft von ra, you run away from the bad, is mitarash, is with a noise. Like somebody who's running away from the danger of death. With gishrei and shturum, with the screaming and a storm. Is as in the sug avodah for yadin. And similar, it's also the category of service of every Jew. Not only by about Tshuva, every Jew has that type of avodah. Even if one who does not have any sins, God forbid, when he reflects how distant he is from Hashem, was the nefesh habahamis is noch by him betokfei. Whether it is because his animal soul is still with full force. And therefore he's an entity and he's something separate from godliness. Or even just the sensing of his self, that he feels his good, he feels himself as good. Nefesh Elikis, it's the godly soul, which means he says himself as an entity. Taka Metzi is the Gedusha. It's an entity of holiness. Or before Metzi, but yet it's a entity. Nit bitl, it's not subjugation, not negation. He is existence. Person realized that he's still an entity. So he gets fired up, aroused with a fiery, great voice, noisy voice. So I'm trying from the matzav to run away from this situation. But gefragt by Baal Shem Tov, they asked by the Baal Shem Tov, news about the fact that Chassidim make motions when they daven. He answered, this is similar. Somebody who's drowning in the ocean. He makes all kinds of movements to save himself. He screams with all of his energy. As they should save him. For sure, nobody laughs at his movements and his yelling and his screaming. From Posuk, Loi berash Hashem. Hashem is not with noise. The Posuk says this does not contradict. But the dig in them is Loi berash Havaya. Over there it says Havaya is not with noise. Kidei zu sein akli zu shem Havaya. In order for a person to be a vessel to the name Havaya, which is higher than worlds, then this service needs to be in the level of a silence, thin sound. Silent sound. Total subjugation. That is to receive Havaya, to receive the higher level of world. Is noch verbunden. However, on the other hand, as opposed to when the service is still connected, tied mit antläufen, from yeshes and metzias, from running away from self, from entity, from being an entity and a thing by himself, was the grecht, that reaches to the Mechin of Shem Elikim. That's the name of Elikim. Was git an ort of Metzias. Name of Elikim, Shem Elikim, gives room for the person to be an entity, to be a Metzias. The Avodah is Kinal. This service I mentioned before, verbunden, davki mitrash v'chulu, that's connected specifically with the noise. Those is their tam, and this is the reason. Was the Avodah from Kohen Gadol ganz Yor, that the service of the Kohen Gadol all year is given in an eifel, was in a way from the Nishma Koil Gomer, that the Koil had to be heard while darf nemen mit sich, because the Kohen Gadol needs to take along with him El HaKodesh, to the holy Oich di Eden. Also, those Jews was their Seder Avodah, their order of service, Knisa L'Gedusha. How do they go in? Is Bekoil Rash. They go in with a lot of noise. This is Oich Merumas in them. That's also hinted by the fact, where did the bells come? They were on the bottom, on the lower part of the Meil. So Merumas in them was the Pamoinim Zayne Gewen Beshulei. They were on the edge, the bottom of the Meil. That Inyan from Venishma Koiloi, this idea that his voice will be heard, is verbunden mit the niedrige Madreges von Yidden. That is connected to the lower levels of Yidden. They're serving Hashem because they find themselves far from Hashem. Those are the Yidden that are represented by going in with the bells, with the noise. Thereby is the Hazorah And now we have the warning, V'nishma koile goymer v'lo yomus. The Kohen Gadol voice must be heard so he doesn't die. In other words, you must include all Yidden, even those Yidden that are far. You can't just go in by yourself without the voice. As in them is tolu the klolos achayis from Kohen Gadol. That here it hinges the general life of the Kohen Gadol. If he doesn't have that voice when he goes in, he does not want to include in the service those Jews who are on the bottom of the coat. Is their far. Even if he doesn't, why doesn't he want to do? Because he wants to be connected. He wants to connect and hold by himself, Kohen Gadol, by the higher type of service of this silent voice. So then his existence is negated. He can't live with his avodah. While the shleimus from Klaus Yisrael is totally, because how does the shleimus from Klal Yisrael hinges in the avodah vasnem tarum ala shishirim Israel, that includes the service which encompasses all 600,000 Yidden. From the Rashechem Shiftechem, the heads, the leaders of the tribes, those who chop wood and draw water, which is on the lowest level. But that changes on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we don't need that noise because everybody is on a higher level. Hey, this is over nor by the Rabbi from Kohen Gadol B'Shech Kol HaShana. This is only by the service of the Kohen Gadol during the year. Then Knisosei in Avedosei is not in Kodesh. When he enters, and the service is only in Kodesh, in the Heichal. Dort is Faran and Orfa the Chiluke Dargis Nidna. But there is room for the different level steps of the Yidden and their Madregas. For the Sheichem Sheftechem Gomer, from the head of the tribe is Choyte V'Tzachah V'Sheva Mecha till those who chop the wood and draw water. And their father says V'Nishma es is berash. That's why it has to be heard. It's with a noise. As opposed to the service of the Kohen Gadol. Yenke Kodesh Kadoshim is on arash. It's without noise. While them old zayin and the Yidden kimalochim, then the Yidden are like angels. These galus from these kashrus atzmis from alle Yidden neighbors. Then alle Yidden, the greater, there's no difference. They're all revealed the essence connection of a Yid with Hashem. And since every Yid, even those that are connected to the bottom of the Me'il, they are totally close and united with godliness. They're one, to be one with Hashem. So also the entrance to the Kodesh HaKadoshim is through the Kohen Gadol. Nit ve'arochek shnase korem. It's not like a far who's coming close. The noise coming from far. But now when the Yechida shines, then everybody is close. Because dan is a mitarash chulu. If it's a far one that coming close, going to the Kodesh, there's noise. But now, when you're already by the level of Yechida Li'achdo Yom Kippur, the betachlis abitul bekoil momadaka. Then you have that silence voice. And now the Rebbe explains the sicha that he started off, the difference between the Ramban. The Ramban says if it's lenoi, make it a tapuach, and Rashi says no, it's still the pomegranate. Well, api kol anal vet sein verstandig. Based on all the above, we'll also understand the Ramban, the difference between the view of the Ramban. As im leno yasim kimin tapuchizov, he argues, if this is meant for beauty, make him apples of gold, shape of apples of gold. Shitus Rashi, and Rashi's view, as in them fall darfun sein rimoin leno, they need the pomegranates leno. Them fall as opposed to the Menorah, but there it's also according to Rashi, tapuach, the kaptorim. But here it has to have the reminder. Eden seinen geglichen side to tapuach and side to. The Jews are equated both to an apple and to a pomegranate. The chelek zwischen zei is the difference between the comparison. The dimyon to tapuach is masim to Eden. That fits the way the Yidden are in the highest of levels. And the level of a Rimon is b'shayches to Eden. That relates to Eden was gefinnen sich b'shval hamatzef. That as they find themselves on the lower level. Learn from the posik pelach harima in the rakosech, that the Yidden and the rakosech, the Gemara translates that the konim shebach, even the one that rakosech are the empty ones are still filled. They too are filled with good and holiness. That even the empty ones are filled with mitzvah karimen. So we see that the apple represents the level of Yidden as they're in the height of their elevation. And the quotes look to Torah from other places, but the Rimon Kipel Charam Rikoz represent the Pesh Yisrael. So in Pirush Rashi Pshuta Shel Mikra, so in Rashi's commentary, which is the simple meaning of the verse, for the Eden werden gesehen, wie sie seine bepashtus bechitzenis, where Eden are visible, the way they are on the simple level, externally. Zetman the Eden shebeshuli hamil. So when you see Yidden that are on the bottom of the coat in a darge von Rekonim, see them as empty, as the Rekonim. Und der Riber hat gedarft sein, darf kerimonim. That's why they needed to be specifically pomegranate, zu beweisen, to show us euch die Rekonim, that also these empties, und afilu du sein nidke davon, not only are they empty Rekonim, but afilu Peshe Yisrael, they are sinners, and Arayin mitten Kohen Gadol la Kodesh. They also entered together with the Kohen Gadol into the holiness. Ze seinen Atel von Klal Yisrael. They're part of the Jewish community. Und noch mehr Meleim mitzvahs kerim, and they're full of mitzvahs like a pomegranate. So we bring in the Rimon which the Pasuk talks about, the Rakosich, Rekonim. We're trying to say you're all included. Peshe Yisrael even included, because we talk about the way they appear. In Pirush HaRamban, in Ramban's explanation, was nit nor pshotim. There is not only simple explanation. Quoting from the Ramban, there is also sweet words that are known to those who know grace, no chacham in the stories. Is not murdgesh the pnimius from Yid. There, it's emphasized the inner of a Yid. Was mitzad dem hot a Yid gescheiches nit zu chet. A Yid doesn't have any connection to sin. Va'amich kulum tzadikim, they're all tzadikim. High time. So now that's what the Rambam says. The Rambam Farish, as the Venishma Koile is nor hachona to the avodah shalacharo. This is only preparing to the avodah that follows from Kohen Gadol. That's not part of the service. Because when the person, the Kohen Gadol, enters into the Kodesh, Oichas, a shliach from Klal Yisrael, also as an age of Klal Yisrael, is an adarge from avodah tzadikim. Bekol Mamadaka is also in a Bekol Mamadaka. The entrance, this is just sort of pre-entrance to tell the king that somebody is coming, but the actual entrance, not the avodah, that's not part of the Nishma Koiloi. So the Ramban sees the toiv, the deeper, the pnimius that is not rekonim. He sees that amach kulum tzadikim. And that's the kushya. There's the question, the Ramban. Loid Zain Pirush. Im Lenoi. So if Rashi says that it's meant for beauty, it's not practical. If it's practical, okay. If it's a hollow, the pomegranate is a hollow, we put in the bell as the Ramban touches. Rashi says that you don't put it inside the bell into the on the bottom, into the pomegranate. So Yasor Kmin Tapuchizo. Then make them, instead of making them in the shape of pomegranate, make them golden apples. If they're not for use purposes, not if I raise to bring in the Shenkai, but if they're to bring out the beauty, then the mile from Bnei Yisrael, the advantage of the for beauty, then we should emphasize not the mile versus merumas, not the advantage which is in Rimoin. In Rimoin, we're saying that they're filled like a pomegranate. Yes, it's a mile that they have. Why are we emphasizing that mile of the Yidden that we're putting a Rimmon over there? Nor the ilu von Yidden mitzat pnimiyusu. The advantage of Yid, the way they're in their inner. Every Yid is like a golden apple. It's not empty, so we don't have to bring it from a rekon of a pomegranate. Bring an apple over there, which every Yid is a golden apple. So if the purpose is Lanoi, if according to the Rambam we're using it, okay, so you use it what you need to use it for. So you use it to put in there. I don't know. I mean, maybe the Rebbe in the orders over here. So why couldn't you make a hollow apple according to the Ramban? Okay, anyways, we're not. Let's go weiter. Just want to say, my purpose is not to is to try to understand and look. There's many other places for questions and answers and explanation, but I'm just trying to understand what the Rebbe says in the sicha. Or der Ilui von Eden bezahlt Primiyusam. Was jeder ist, aber der Buch und nicht gerechnet. Derich wie in der Meneure, this is why in der Meneure. Was jeder seinen Merumes auf Eden, wie sie seinen. That hints to the level of Eden as we are, the Zayin Madrigas in Ovde Hashem. That talks to Meneure itself is talking about. That's Eden our service of Hashem. Over there was the formation of the tapuchim. So the Rebbe in Zion seems like the avodah of the Mamadaka is a higher level. Shem Avaya versus Shem Elikim, Noi versus making the noise. Over there, well, there is an advantage. The Rebbe says, "Avopiyas b'pashtus u'b'chitzonis," even though on the simple level and externally is the avodah in an oifum from the nishma koila is in a way that the voice is heard. Nidriker from the avodah b'kol mamadaka, which is lower than the service of the silent, thin voice. Avopikain is though in ear there is in it in the avodah barash. In the service with noise, also an advantage relative to the service in the subjugation. Is mitahagbola. The word the koil mamadaka is when limited. Emes, that ovid steitaka mitabitl. The one who is serving is subjugated. Thus is oberin an oifum from oir bekli. It's still a light that comes in a vessel. Mitahis yashus. It settles. Settle, thin voice, missing that hyper, the excitement. The service of Nishma Koila is the Raj Godel Gufa Bavais. This great noise, the excitement that proves, as there is a Rosh from Dagbolos from Caleb, that he has left, he has exited the limitation of the vessels. And can it makbil sein the spilus? You can no longer limit that excitement. When the river comes to Sarois and that's why it comes out in a screaming and a voice. This is einer from the timing of them, and this is one of the reasons why we say that in a place where Baal Tshuva stand, Tshuva are b'chela yatir with more force, with more excitement. The tzaddikim cannot even stand the chulu. Well, davki in the mirash for avodas hatshuva, because specifically in this noise that comes from the level of tshuva, zok tzicharois that believable for neshama. This expresses the limitless of the soul. And the Rebbe brings out now, that's why in our days we need to have everything done in the extra, in the way of a fanfare, especially as the Rebbe says, the other side makes a lot of noise. We need to make a lot of noise in order to conquer, in order to be successful in the tzad from Kedusha. From all the above is we have a very special lesson for our generation, Dora, the generation of the hills of Mashiach. There are those that argue, hey, Nemes, let it be true. As because our situation of the deterioration, the low level of our generation, we must occupy ourselves with spreading out Torah, strengthening Judaism, etc. You cannot be satisfied with sitzen the eigene Dal Ames just by sitting in your own 4 cubits. I feel in the Dal Ames of Torah, not even in the 4 cubits of Torah, we can't. They agree to that. And we can't wait until somebody will turn to him and as the Torah, ask him, beg him to spread the Torah. You have to go outside, into the outside. Find Jews who have been pushed away, or far away. So they agreed to that. But why this noise? Why this fanfare? Why this hyperactivity? Why do you got to do this with such a big fanfare? Why do we have to go out in the street and to announce there with a loud voice, as Eden soll legen tefillin, Jews should put tefillin, unklap mezuzahs of the tiran to bang, put up mezuzahs on the doors, geben tzedakah, die tzedakah yetzbah. And hoge was me gefindt nit. We find this is a conduct we don't find a Sturmbose, that there should be such a noise, such a fanfare in the Friedrich Deuters, the previous generation. Is there entweder them? The answer is like Allah Simoni from Masechta Soita, according to all signs in the tract of Soita, Zetman and Megefin Zachitz in Dordik Mashiach. We see that we find ourselves in the generations of the Hill of Mashiach. In that darge, in the level Hayesher Tachtoin, in the lowest level, we're in the Shule Ami'il. We're in the bottom of the coat. Darf man wissen sein. So we need to know. As Bishule Ami'il darf sein de Pamoinim. On the bottom of the coat, we need these bells. As the Knisa von Sug Idna LaKodesh. That the entrance of this category of Kodesh, which means to bring them in. Those who are on the bottom of the coat, to bring them into Kodesh, to bring them into Yiddishkeit, Tachas Kan Fashchina, under the wings of the Shechina. It's set up in a way from the Nishma Koile, that making a noise, that the noise should be heard when you bring them in. But Adrabah, on the contrary, Davkin, the Mirash, from Avedis Atshuva, specifically in this noise of the worst service of tshuva, is the tachlis ha'iluk. Now this is the ultimate elevation, as said earlier. Tes nochanina. There's another point in it. You see those who transgress Hashem's will. You hear the noise of the Romans, as the Gemara says over there. They're partying and everything else. All matters of the other side. They're not done in the hidden rooms, inside rooms. With the greatest publicity, the greatest noise. is der Weg zum Erwartel sein dem Sturm von Sitra Achra. What's the way to negate, to destroy that noise of the other side? B'mina v'dugmosa, as in its own kind, with Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya, from the forest itself, to make the axe, to go ahead and cut off, to make the wood from the rash that they make in Sitra Achra, make it into Kedusha. Das heißt, durch dem was euch die Avoide von äußere Zäune, through that we who do Hashem's will, is an Aneufung, wenn ich Makoyle, we do it with a noise, und davki in dem Ort, was die Finzich Kol Amenes Loreme, and specifically in the place where there's all the noise of Roman, on Fifth Avenue, wherever the tanks go, and the biggest noises, those that bring in zum alle Evre Zäune Kach, äußere Zäune Lachas Kam Vakam. If Hashem allows for the Amoyne Shel Reimi, he does so for how much more so for those who do, as Rabbi Akiva told the Chachamim when they were crying, that Hashem will do for Oyser Tzedek Achas Kam Vakam. As Ba'iden Betzayin Yoshim Betach V'Hashke, the Jews will sit secure and quiet, like Alad Mos on their land. There will be the great shofar, will be blown, Dafke. A lot of big noise. Through the sound that is going to notify, and is going to notify and say, going to notice about the redemption, B'Korev Mamish, very soon. This is Mesichas Shabbos Parshas Tetzaveh Tovshin Lamed Hey.